Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, I'm going to do a full-length tutorial demo for the Facebook group Watercolors Techniques and Tips. And this is just like a monthly challenge as a guest artist. The focus of this is going to be luminist type landscapes in watercolor. And I'm going to try to go in detail as much as possible as I go through the process. And I'll talk about materials as I use them, as well as the pigments and alternatives you can experiment with. So in front of me, I have a 9x12 piece of hot press paper. This is the New York Central pad, 100% cotton. And I taped it down to approximately 6x11. The art movements that I enjoy, the landscapes from the 1800s, often had these wider landscapes that we're working with. So I encourage you to experiment with different proportions and just using tape to tape things down into different things. It'll make it harder to find a mat or a frame for it, but this is more painting, having fun, and developing different styles. So we'll start out with wetting our paper. I'm using a Paul Rubens, I think it's the number 6 squirrel mop. I bought it off of Amazon years ago, and it probably cost me either between $15 to $25. You can find squirrel mops even cheaper than that if you look onto things like Timo and other places. And for the most part, I think everything kind of in that range is probably, just the same thing but rebranded, or just different factories but the same concept. You could also get really crazy and buy expensive ones, but I encourage you to just kind of play around. A more expensive mop brush, a quill brush, might make you reluctant to experiment and use it to its full capacity, because you might be trying to baby it. Okay, so with these landscapes, one of the things I really enjoy doing is starting off with Naples yellow, where I want my horizon line above and below to be. This right here is the Winsor Newton Naples yellow. And for fun, let's grab the Daniel Smith one and see if you can see the difference. Daniel Smith one's a little bit redder. If you don't have Naples yellow, you can experiment with yellow ochre. You could also take white gouache and mix some of the lighter yellows into it. I think that is usually the pigment combinations that a decent amount of brands use for Naples yellow or Juan Brilliance. You can look up the pigment combinations as well and just try them at your leisure. Okay, this will go fairly simple. I'll grab some ultramarine and we'll wash in a sky that's going to gradiate down from the one to the next. Now you can experiment with Prussian blue, which I really like using with this. You can play around with reds, oranges, yellows, etc. So you can really do anything you want to really see the different times of day and the different moods and effects you can get. Now, I've been playing around with this style for probably about a year now, just experimenting, exploring. And things like washes, especially initial smooth washes like this, were not really part of my my repertoire in the past. So there's still times where I find myself having a little bit of difficulty with it, and that's why you probably see me doing it more than you would see other people doing that. Okay. I'm going to pause the camera. I'm going to hit it with a blow dryer. And whenever you're using a blow dryer to dry off a painting, it's going to push the water and the pigment around. I recommend holding it at a higher distance and starting with a low speed and then kind of ramping it up, watching the areas that are going to hold more water. You can see right here I have a little bit of water forming. I paint pretty much flat, but there is a slight angle to it. So after you dry it off, you'll see that there's a tonal shift, that things lighten up as the water gets removed from it, kind of like wet cement versus dry cement. You have that change that takes place. You can play around with the concentration of pigment beforehand, and like I said, you have a whole slew of colors that you can play with, and just get the different vibes and see the different effects. Okay, so that being said, let me grab a smaller quill brush. I have a whole bunch of these that I picked up off of Temu for, I don't know, about like $3 each. If you're buying stateside, you can look at Jerry's Artorama with, I think the Creative Mark. I think that they have a cheap quill brush under there. And then of course there's Amazon and others. All right, so I'm gonna grab some Naples Yellow and I'll kind of talk about how you can explore, or at least the way that I explore a field or grass or just a plane going back into the picture plane. I experiment more with the yellows on the horizon at that distance, and then I switch over to a green, and the green that I've been playing around with a lot lately is Daniel Smith Rich Green Gold. With those, just to kind of talk about like prices and alternatives, you can mix Prussian blue or your phthalo blue with your earth pigments and see what type of greens you get there. The Prussian blue would probably give kind of like a neon type greenish, and that might be where you'd want to experiment if you don't have any greens on the palette. If you have just maybe a phthalo green or phthalo blue, I think I mentioned that one. But the phthalo green you can mix with some earth pigments and they make it more natural looking. So there's that option too. And probably the same thing with Viridian, but I don't think I've ever used Viridian. Okay. I'm going to leave this open here for a little bit of water, and you'll see again it developed over time. And then the closest, I play around with different reds or red earths, or we could switch to a darker green. Here I'm going to start experimenting with, this is New Gold by Da Vinci brand. I think it's essentially their version of quinacridone gold. And I'll just get a little bit on this side. But if you don't have these colors, honestly, don't worry. The whole thing is just about experimenting and learning what the paint's doing and just getting ideas of how we want to develop it, and sometimes getting ideas for the next painting in the middle of the painting process. I'm going to pause the camera and hit with a blow dryer because I wind up tracking paint with the back of my hand. By the way, I do need to say this real quick. If you are following along, you're more than welcome to, and you have my express permission to sign your own name and sell anything you do when you follow along. I want you guys to have fun, and I want you guys to have money for art supplies, and through the process you'll develop your own style. That being said, if you want to support this channel, I do have the Patreon linked down below. I've been putting a lot of full lengths up on there, and I also have Etsy where I have originals for sale for really cheap prices. So yeah, if you don't mind checking those out, I'd appreciate it. All right, back to this. So here's a cheap round number 0, and I kind of play with different brushes whenever I'm looking at trees, and we'll go with something simple. And I'm going to grab any type of light color. You can play with your earth colors. You can play with your yellows. I'm going to go with this same rich green gold for this one. We're going to get an idea of where we want to put trees. I've been playing around a lot with tree lines, and I really enjoy them. We might do a group of trees just kind of in this area. Let's see what happens. So I use different brushes for this part, and I like to move it on the side and kind of get a little dry brush going on. And this is the same motion I kind of sketch with a pencil. And while I'm kind of developing these things and experimenting with this style, if I'm sketching in a pad with a pencil and then can do the same motion with the brush, I find that that helps. I've done this with the small Chinese whisker brushes. You can do it with the small quill brush. You can do it with a few different brushes. I did put it essentially dead center here, so we'll probably move the mass off a little bit to the side. Get the idea of maybe another one taking place. And let's look on the other side and see what we can do. Let's go up high here. So I'm just grabbing a little brush, a little bit of water, grabbing a little paint on the brush. It'll probably be a little bit sloppier than what I usually do, but that's just because I'm, filming full length and narrating, and you're trying to be aware of time. Okay, let's look at those two right there. We could probably put another one in and work to the edge of it, but let's just stay in this region right now. A few things to note. Whenever you're putting together the groups of trees, you don't want the treetops to be level right next to each other. You want some variation. Same thing with the placement and the painting itself. I have this one that we started talking about, forming a smaller one. Need to change it around a little bit. Bring a little bit more height to it. But having variety and distances between each part. We don't want the same distance between every tree. Okay. For this, I've been reaching for the cheap Chinese whisker brush. Temu, a pack of 3 for $3 or less. Amazon, same pack, $10, give or take. So just to give you an idea of prices. I've been using this just because I really like the point that it gets. And you can get really expressive strokes with it. But I'll try to stay away from that for right now. You don't have to go crazy buying brushes. Just, try a small spotter brush, or script brush, or rigger brush. A whole bunch of options there. Now this is just a dark. This is Van Dyke Brown. And I like to use it to get an idea of where I want my trees to sit. I'm going to go darker here, and as I move towards this light source, I'm going to lighten up. In fact, I'm just going to grab some like raw sienna or yellow ochre, and put that in there, letting that light start to envelop the tree trunks. and it just creates a gradient in the painting itself. Let's go back to the Van Dyke Brown though, and essentially put a line below the tree line. Play around with it, get variety in the marks, raise it vertically, leave some gaps. And that starts to really set into place, and it's going to really help build up the next parts. While we're at it, I feel like I'm going to say that a lot. Let's grab some Naples yellow, and I'm going to go in over that background right above and behind that tree line. I do this to create sense of depth and to create a field behind that tree line. So we have the field, tree, field, and then we'll look for some background far distant trees. And we're going to come back and forth in this. Now, I do like to work the whole painting at once, so I apologize if it seems like it's kind of random or all over the place. But I'm going to grab rich green gold. And start washing that in, scrubbing that over, whatever language you want to use for it. Let's grab undersea green, so you can see. So we can darken as we come to the foreground. So we can play with that. We kind of talked about putting the red, the gold in the foreground, the quinacridone gold. We can come in here with that. And it'll be some back and forth. We're not done with this spot. Here's a little bit of Naples yellow, which we had put in the sky. You can start getting the idea of the reflections there. And you can do as much or as little as you want, but at this stage, if you want, you could take a paper towel and just kind of go over it and lift a little bit, and you can get some textures that'll start taking place. And then as you layer, you can see if there's ones you want to keep or get rid of. I'm going to pause it and hit it with the blow dryer. All right, let's look at the background, the far distant trees that aren't there yet. And you can grab like Naples, the yellow ochre, the raw sienna, brown ochre, whatever one you want to play with. And you could really use, the darker pigments. You can go with greens. Experiment to see what you like and how it works for the overall color scheme. Now, what I like to do is go in the darker on the one side, and then as we move from left to right or to the light source, I have changes take place. In this one, I'm going to keep it going for a little bit, but then I'm going to lighten it up. So I'm going to water it down some. So the idea here is to get this light source to envelop objects. And you can do it by lightening the pigment load, which we did, just mixing some more water in. You could also take white gouache and put a kind of a layer, not an opaque layer, but a layer over that, and that'll create the same effect and push it in the background. In fact, I mentioned that I enjoy the painters of the 1800s. Within those oil paintings, they use that technique a lot. Okay, let's see. And then we can use the same concept right here while I'm talking about it. Here's the white, sorry, the Naples yellow, and let the white in it essentially come down over the grass right there, over that field. Now, over time, if this is kind of a painting style or compositions that you want to pursue, you'll start playing around with, you know, the vertical heights of the background fields, of the foreground fields, of the trees themselves. And that is more a matter of painting, and seeing what you want to change and experiment with. In fact, this is probably a larger vertical distance than I usually use. While we're working in this area, I don't think I'll pull any paint away. Let's grab some more of the rich green gold and kind of see what ideas we want here. So the first trees, the first marks that I put in were kind of proportion marks. I really don't map out what I do with a pencil or any of those in that regard. And I don't know why. I think it was just how I was taught how to paint in oils and draw and stuff like that. So that's just kind of what I do. So kind of sketching things out with the paint really helps me. Okay, so rich green gold. Now, I've used the convenience greens. It's just kind of the direction I've been exploring. So this is the undersea green. However, you can do the same thing with yellow ochre, burnt umber, raw umber, probably burnt siennas, and just play with those color schemes, like just looking for a progression in darkness. All right, I think we're wet right here, so I'm not going to do the next part just yet in there. And, you know, like I said, or at least, I don't know if I mentioned it, it doesn't have to follow this particular order. You know, whatever works for you, you work in the whole painting. Rich green gold. Let's grab, this is a yellow. I'm not sure if it's nickel azo yellow. I think that's what it is. Just to show how, you know, if we're kind of staying near the same color scheme or we're not making mud, we can just glaze and wash these colors over in different directions and see what way we want to head. Eventually it'll darken too much and you can't really do the corrective, or it just kind of goes to a point of no return. But I encourage you to just experiment and see what you can build up with it. I think that this right here is one of the reasons a lot of people say that these paintings look like oils. I'm bringing that color in a little bit on these sides so we could transition to that nice light. So just that gradient that I was talking about. In fact, let's grab some undersea green and we'll look for a left to right gradient here. So it'll look a little darker on the outside, and then we'll have that brighter color here. And you guessed it, blow dryer. Okay, dry enough. Now things will probably start to change. And especially with the tree line itself, I like to kind of just go in whatever direction it wants to go in. And what I mean by that is that other shapes will start to form. They might grow larger and wider and maybe add more trees. This is the undersea green, and I'm thinking about underbrush. I'm going to bring that dark up into here. I'm thinking about my light coming from here, and since I'm imagining these trees, I'm going to let the darkest parts be in that bottom left-hand side of the tree. Let's, build up small growth taking place. It rises and falls. It might be just dead wood that's piled up. I like to connect the shadows and the darks of the trees with the shadow that's lying on the land. And now I start getting more into tree trunks. And this is the Van Dyke Brown again. And you can mix Van Dyke Brown. Probably use sepia. You have different options there. Whatever you want to use for a dark. In fact, you can mix your darks, and maybe I'll get to that. And I'm just letting shapes form, which honestly will probably seem messy at first, and you might not have the best grasp on it. And I'm not saying that I do. I'm just saying that you just start to let it flow and let your imagination create stuff. It's a raw sienna or yellow ochre. You start putting ideas in there. And you could always use this brush, and I'll do that so you can see. We can go and kind of hash that in. Just looking around the edges, seeing how I want to change proportions, if I want to change any. That's the rich green gold. Bringing over a gold or a yellow or something like that between gaps without making that the brightest spot will often help too. Okay, so I'm going to wind up doing a dry off in a moment, but let's get some more pigment down before we do that. I'm building up the Naples yellow to see how I want that to look. I did cover up a lot of that background field, but I had done that gradient to prepare for it. And then I can go back into it and put ideas between tree trunks and branches where you're seeing that field through there. And that's going to have a gradient as well. So as we go in this direction, I like to go darker with it. But right now, we're just getting things in place, getting ideas there. Okay, let's look at this foreground. We'll play with another wash on top. And once again, you could stop at any point. I just really like to experiment. But here's a heavy application of the rich green gold. Bring out a little bit there, up in the back. Let's go with that nickel azo titanium. And let's see, like I said, so many different options we could play around with in the foreground. Let's go undersea green. Darken that side up. Here I like to try to hide the brush marks. Textures and other marks are fine and work for me, but I don't want it to look just like a standard brush mark. There we go. And of course, as per usual, if you want, see any, you could pull out any marks, go for it. Also, like as you layer, it'll let you move around with the back of the brush more now. And I'm not quite sure why that happens, but I think maybe the previous layers are still somewhat dry and undisturbed. So we have a smoother surface we can move paint around on top of. I had run a lot of experiments where I was coating the paper in gum arabic to essentially do this type of thing on top initially. And from what I understand, varnishing watercolor paper was something that had taken place in the 1800s. And you could also simulate it by working on Yepo, the plastic paper, the synthetic paper. Okay. Pause for a dry off. Okay. So let's grab this Chinese brush. And I'm going to grab a color we haven't used. This is Hansa Yellow Light. And we can kind of look for a little bit of glowing effects around the edges with it. We could play with gamboge, we could play with the quinacridone gold, you could play with the nickel azo yellow, lemon yellow, a whole bunch of different things you can put into that spot, even yellow ochre, and just to see what happens. I try not to do the whole edge with the same thing because then it looks I think that it really wouldn't make sense because of the light coming from that spot, and we have just more light right behind it, while here we have light on an angle. But we can grab, I think this is raw sienna, and look how that is around those edges. Just for fun, just so we can see stuff. Here's a little bit of gamboge. You can use Indian yellow. cover up some of those openings a little bit with that. Let's see. Let's just go rich green gold on this one. So the main thing, if you're not familiar with my videos, is that I encourage experimentation. I consider every painting, for the most part, an experiment for me, where I'm trying to play out different ideas and trying to push towards a certain goal over the course of months, or I guess years at this point. So everything kind of plays a role in experimentation for me. And sometimes I don't have exact formulas for how I want to paint things, because I'm always exploring different options. Let me see something. Let's bring that rich green gold in here. Okay. Now, a dark that I've been using for a lot of these experiments in the beginning is perylene green. Perylene green is a black pigment that, like it's PBK 31, and it's on the darker side of things. Whenever I put it in the initial stages of a painting, it kind of doesn't look the best, but here it really starts to layer nicely as a dark, and you can kind of let your own touch start taking place. Here I'm just building up these darker areas and bringing it down to that dark that I talked about below, just almost working like a really burnt out felt tip pen. We can get more water on there, and we can go in like that. So I'm just showing you those differences so you can see all the things you can experiment, see which texture you like the most. Okay, I'll use more water here. I'm going to bring this shadow mass or darker mass out in front of this guy, and we'll even maybe give it a little bit more life and height in this region. Then you could play with ideas of having the really dark here, and then the glow in between them. I'm just using that same hash mark angle that I use, but you can come in and play with curves. And if you do that, you can play with curves on top. I'm going to grab some green gold. And if you ever get nervous, you can get texture in there. I like to look through the camera to see where we're at with everything. I want to darken this side. So let's under sea green. And I could pass it up amongst these guys. Nickel azo. could put a little dark on that's kind of bank right there. And a little bit of reflection down into that water, which we really haven't even looked at yet. But before we get to that, we now have another opportunity to move some pigment around and get some movement. You can bring the field down and the eye down. You can maybe get some marks that go up into the plane, leading to that point of interest. And use paper towel. There's a lot of different things we can do. Back of the nail. In fact, let's look at this guy real quick. Here's ultramarine blue. Nope, no, that is not ultramarine blue. That's dirty brush water that had all the yellows on it picking up ultramarine. Let's see. There we go. And let's just grab the Naples yellow. And we could dash white gouache in it. I'm just essentially using colors that are in the sky and not going too crazy with it right now. And then I could always grab that nickel azo again and let it reflect and kind of glow over onto it. I try not to have really harsh edges between the water and the land itself, or not a super large amount. I'm going to pause and we're going to hit it with the blow dryer. All right, so we're 40 minutes in, and once again, you can take these paintings as far as you want or as short as you want. You can experiment with what works for you, what doesn't, where you want to go and what you want to stay with. That's a little, there we go. Okay, so there's some white gouache over there. I'm going to try to grab some nice, strong Naples yellow. I do find that if you pick some trees to work with, especially closer to the light, and you go between them like that, which we had done some of that earlier, it really brings out the contrast in that spot. You can just drag a little bit over it. There we go. That might mellow out, but gives us an idea in there. This is brown ochre, which I didn't really grab much. Okay. You can kind of darken up some of these guys, maybe a little bit different tree layer, and it just creates more of that contrast. Here's burnt umber in there. Okay. Here is Van Dyke brown. So I talked about using the lighter paint for the tree trunks right here, but we can go in, put a darker, thicker tree trunk there for more contrast, a little bit more depth, etc. While I kind of get a little bit of tree branches in like this, I'm just kind of letting them grow and exploring. I'll explain where I'm kind of thinking about with that. So there's Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting, 1920s when it came out. You could probably find a public domain version of it. I think it's public domain. And he talks about light enveloping dark objects behind it, and dark essentially enveloping light objects that are in front of it. Where with the thinner objects, the light will seem to curve around it more, or at least curves around to a point compared to the other points that it's going to be lighter. So we can think about that there. Darken this. We can look for another dark one if we want, or we can lose the trunks as we go from left to right, or lose them and regain them again. I'll try to show some examples of that. Here's just like a yellow ochre or raw sienna. So we could have dark, and then we come back to some light ones again. You can kind of paint them in here, but you don't really see them. But that's a gradient as well, where it's going from the light to the dark. And we could have some come up again. It's all just this small growth. There's the depth to this group of trees. It's not just the three masses we're seeing. So we have all that happening. We can taper a few ideas out here. Let's look at this brush for some different mark making. If I splay the brush out all crazy, and you can experiment with your different brushes that you have, like that. Let's grab some, what is it? Van Dyke Brown. This becomes very dancing, kind of like the other marks previously that we had talked about. We can move them around, blur them out. Let's see. Tap them in place. And it just starts to make it seem like there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the field, and that it's not just one wash of one color. Even go right along there, since it's working out, to grow a little bit of grass into the foreground. Okay. If we want to put a little bit more interest in this spot, we can grab something like buff titanium, or white gouache mixes, etc. Something a little bit on the opaque side, and put some little rocks along that side. Now this has a tendency to kind of dry some and lighten up, and not as opaque, so you might want to layer it on top of that. So I think that's a lot of the key points. So I'll wrap it up here. You can go much further with it and really experiment more with painting into that background and just getting those points of contrast taking place. You can add more elements. You can play with different trees. I'll try to film another one or two for the month for the Facebook page for the watercolors, techniques, and tips. But yeah, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Check me out at Andrew Broussard on Etsy. Sorry, I think it's Andrew B. Watercolors on Etsy, and on the Patreon, Andrew Broussard Watercolors. All right, y'all take care and have a great day.